More than 27,000 people were displaced in Colombia during the first quarter of this year, as the violence continues to escalate in the country. In Brazil, a parliamentary inquiry began into possible negligence and the use of federal funds by the government of President Jair Bolsonaro in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Talks aimed at bringing the United States back into the 2015 Iran nuclear deal resumed this Tuesday in Vienna. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. More than 27,000 people were displaced in Colombia during the first quarter of this year, as the violence continues to escalate in the country. The Colombian Human Rights Ombudsman revealed that the amount of people displaced so far this year represents an increase of 177% as compared to the same period last year. People have been forced from their homes amid threats, assassinations and massacres, forced recruitment by armed gangs and clashes between armed groups in areas without a strong state presence, the Ombudsman said on Monday. The United Nations has condemned the endemic violence in the country, noting an intensification as well as increased territorial and social control by non-state armed groups and criminal groups in its annual report. The International Committee of the Red Cross also said in March that Colombia was facing at least 5 continuing conflicts with armed groups that were affecting the daily lives of Colombians.
For me, this displacement was a very hard thing because it is a very big uprooting of so many years with the civilian population. To live with children and arrive in these conditions to this place, we do not know where we are going to sleep.
Uruguayan schools transport owners protested in front of the presidential palace on Tuesday to demand tax exemptions and more government credits for their business, which has been paralyzed by school closures and distance learning implemented in the country due to the pandemic.
Our vehicles are parked and we have nothing to eat. We don't have any way to pay. So if the government doesn't help us, school transportation dies.
We need a small solution. Something. If not, we don't have how to pay. Simple.
And China's top legislator, Li Sansu, held virtual talks with the president of Venezuela's National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, this Tuesday, during which the two sides agreed to strengthen exchange and cooperation between their respective legislative bodies. Li Sansu stated that China is willing to strengthen relations with the Venezuelan parliament and implement the agreements reached by the leaders of the two countries. He also said that China is working to maintain exchanges at all levels, enhance policy coordination, and advance in the construction of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese legislator also pledged to step up exchanges in culture, education, and technology, and reinforce cooperation to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, Jorge Rodriguez expressed gratitude for China's support and assistance in the fight against the pandemic. He added that the Venezuelan National Assembly stands ready to strengthen and contribute to the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two nations. The attorneys for the family of a black man killed by police in North Carolina, Andrew Brown Jr., stressed on Tuesday that the autopsy shows he died of a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Protesters have taken to the streets of Elizabeth City for the past week over Brown's fatal shooting by officers executing a search warrant. Relatives said that according to the autopsy they commissioned, that he died from the bullet that struck his neck as he tried to drive away from several police officers who shot him 5 times. The family described the killing as an execution and demanded that all police body camera video be released. Officials in Elizabeth City, home to nearly 20,000 people, declared a state of emergency and ordered a curfew in anticipation of possible protest over the latest death of an African American at the hands of the police.
Pops, man, yesterday I said he was executed. This autopsy report showed me that was correct.
This, in fact, was a fatal wound to the back of Mr. Brown's head as he was leaving the site trying to evade being shot at by these particular law enforcement officers who we believe did nothing but a straight out execution.
It's important to note that the projectile was recovered in his brain. It never exited. And the trajectory, Attorney Daniels, was from bottom to top, left to right, back to front. So it went into the base of the neck, in the bottom of the brain, the skull, and got lodged in his brain.
And the Spanish government has condemned death threats against ministers after several top leftist politicians received bullets and knife in the post. Tourism Minister Reyes Maroro said on Monday he had received a knife covered in red stains, days after the leader of the left-wing Podemos party, Pablo Iglesias, as well as the Interior Minister and the head of the Civil Guard, received threatening letters containing bullets. The threats, believed to have come from the far-right groups, come ahead of the regional elections in Madrid to be held on May the 4th, in which Pablo Iglesias is running for regional president. Outgoing regional leader of Madrid, Isabel Díaz Ayuso, of the Conservative Popular Party, accused the left of trying to use the threats for political gain.
Violence, no intimidation against ministers, senior officials or public officials will succeed in weakening the deep democratic convictions that shape this government. The government wishes to unreservedly express its concern about the climate of tension, the climate of confrontation and incitement to hatred promoted by those political groups, which creates a breeding ground for the normalization of absolutely reprehensible situations that should require the unanimous condemnation, without any kind of nuance, and all social actors.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Brazil, a parliamentary inquiry began this Tuesday into possible negligence and the use of federal funds by the government President Jair Bolsonaro in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The creation of a parliamentary commission to investigate claims regarding the disastrous and potentially criminal response to a COVID-19 pandemic that has killed nearly 400,000 Brazilians was requested by the opposition senator Randolfo Rodrigues, who explained that the intention is to investigate the actions and omissions of the federal government. The commission will evaluate criminal negligence in the purchase of vaccines, the minimizing of the severity of the pandemic, of incentives to adopt restrictive measures, the promotion of treatments without proven scientific evidence, as well as President Bolsonaro's responsibility in the lack of attention to address the environmental crisis in the Amazon and also the genocide of indigenous communities. Governor of the Brazilian state of Ceará, Camilo Santana, described the politicization of the use of COVID-19 vaccines as unacceptable in reference to the health regulatory agency's decision to ban the use of Sputnik V in Brazil. The agency claimed the decision was based on an alleged lack of documentary evidence of the vaccine safety and the possibility of flaws in his manufacturers, despite the fact that the Russian-developed vaccine was the target of an international smear campaign for months. It has now been approved for use in 61 countries and shown efficacy of 97.6% based on the analysis of data from 3.8 million vaccinated Russian citizens. In Bolivia, 8 mass vaccination sites were inaugurated in the cities of La Paz and El Alto in order to begin vaccinating citizens aged over 60.
Regulation against COVID-19 has been gradual, according to the arrival of vaccines and their availability, but I think we are going to be able to vaccinate the entire population over the course of time. It is very important for the population to have access to the vaccine so they can make informed decisions, but it is entirely up to the individual. No one can say get vaccinated or don't get vaccinated. It is a personal decision.
Mexico, hard hit by COVID-19, has been experiencing a drop in the number of deaths and hospitalizations for the past 2.5 months, in contrast to other countries in the region that are suffering a new wave of contagions. After a deadly start to the year, the country shows an encouraging outlook, highlighted on Tuesday by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who overcame the disease in February.
And the good news that we have 14 consecutive weeks of declines in the estimated number of new infections, deaths and hospitalizations.
Out of 100 people who get tested for COVID in Mexico City, today we are at 7.5%. That is, 7.5 are positive, the lowest number since the pandemic began.
United States citizens vaccinated against the coronavirus will no longer need to wear masks outdoors, except at crowded events, government health authorities announced on Tuesday. However, World Health Organization experts have warned that vaccinated people must continue to observe precautions, especially the use of masks, physical distancing, hand washing, and avoiding large gatherings, as vaccines are still under examination to determine immunity rates, duration, and effectiveness in vulnerable age groups like the elderly or the children.
Generally, for vaccinated people, outdoor activities without a mask are safe. However, we continue to recommend masking in crowded outdoor settings and venues, such as packed stadiums and concerts, where there is decreased ability to maintain physical distance and where many unvaccinated people may also be present.
In the Netherlands, the eastern city of Arnhem saw large protests on Tuesday to demonstrate against the government and lockdown measures. City officials urged people to stay away from the area, and protesters marched through the city chanting slogans like "We are the Netherlands" and "Love, Freedom, No Dictatorship." According to reports, the demonstration remained peaceful and was monitored by a large police presence, which ended with organizers thanking officers and the city's mayors. Portugal's national state of emergency will end in the coming days. President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa announced that the decree that grants the government legal powers to impose lockdowns will not be extended into the coming month.
Hearing the experts in the morning, during the afternoon the parties with the sitting parliament, and throughout these weeks the government, all of this led me to decide not to extend the state of emergency. I took this decision based on the stable situation, the lower mortality rate, the lower number of people in intensive care, and onwards, as well as the transmission rate reduction, spread indicator, also the number of infected on the pandemic impact.
The British Indian diaspora is fundraising through the London-based Hindu Council UK, an umbrella group of different charities and Hindu organizations around the country, to raise funds to help virus-stricken India.
We had reached over £100,000 of donations, which we transferred quickly to India and got translated into medical provisions, non-medical provisions, therapeutics. So people, in India were able to benefit from the donations of the British Asians. Yes, the funds that we are raising here in the UK at the Nizam Temple is going towards provisions like providing, equipment, beds, and materials for oxygen, also providing food for the frontline workers, as well as the patients and their family.
And India has become the global example of how not to deal with the pandemic, or so it seems. If you watch mainstream media, it looks like a classic story of a developing country disaster and the West coming to the rescue. But there is more than that to this story. Let's take a look. While horror images like this come from India, the United States, Britain and other countries are rushing emergency aid to the world's second most populated country.
Emergency shipment of over 600 items of equipment, their ventilators, oxygen concentrators.
The hospital ran out of oxygen. They did not even inform the family of the shortage beforehand, and they called just to say please come urgently, and when we came here the person was already dead.
But what's behind of all this is a double standard.
I have to say that there's something disingenuous, I think, about the UK government's response to the Indian crisis, because just up to this point, the United Kingdom asked for 10 million doses of vaccines that were being made in India that were exclusively meant for poor countries who had no choice. The United Kingdom is also blocking a waiver of pharmaceutical monopolies at the World Trade Organization that South Africa and India have proposed. That is, again, a travesty. And finally, the United Kingdom has leverage over companies like Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, who it funds, it sends large amounts of money to. It should exert its legal, financial, and moral pressure.
In Germany, COVID-19 has dealt yet another blow to the sports industry as the government adopts stricter measures to curb a third wave of infections. According to the president of the German Olympic Committee, the country's sports clubs have lost nearly 1 million members to the coronavirus pandemic. The restrictions have impacted both amateur and professional athletes for months, as no games or sports training have been possible since the beginning of November. Meanwhile, around 90,000 sports clubs throughout the country remain closed. Following the amended version of the Infection Protection Act, professional and elite athletes competing for national teams may continue to train and to participate in competitions still without an audience and in compliance with protective and hygiene measures. And we have more stories coming up after the final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. This Tuesday, senior diplomats from Iran, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom and Germany kicked off the third round of talks in the Austrian capital, aimed at reviving the Iran nuclear deal, which the United States unilaterally abandoned in May 2018. A U.S. delegation headed by Robert Malley, the U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, is also in Vienna, as intense behind-the-scenes negotiations are ongoing to save the accord. Two working groups have spent the past few weeks working to draft a comprehensive list of the sanctions that the United States needs to lift, and the steps Iran will need to reverse for all sides to go back into full compliance with the 2015 deal. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani stated on Tuesday that the talks in Vienna have advanced in resolving up to 70% of pending issues, and that results should be reached in a short time as long as U.S. representatives continue to act with honesty. Joe Biden's administration has said it is ready to remove all sanctions that are inconsistent with the deal, although it has not spelled out which measures it means, while Iran has stressed all sanctions must be lifted before it returns to its commitments under the accord.
Will be a very important week indeed. We do see some important progress registered, while we also see some major differences remain. So it's just axiomatic that U.S. should abolish all its unilateral sanctions against Iran, as well as any third party in the first place, before Iran moved to implement the provisions on the JCPOA accordingly.
And Chad's new leader, Mohamed Dbeibeh, said Tuesday he will be the warranter for an inclusive national dialogue during the country's transition, also in this period. The statement comes after at least 2 people died during banned protests against the Transitional Military Council, which took power after the death of his father and longtime president, Idriss Dbeibeh.
These values, so dear to our late president, will be demonstrated and enshrined in the framework of an inclusive national dialogue that will be organized during this transition period. I will be the guarantor of this dialogue, which will not shy away from any subject of national interest, according to a precise timetable that the government will be called upon to reveal.
This Tuesday, China launched its Long March 6 rocket, sending 9 commercial satellites into space. The satellites have entered their planet orbits and will provide China's Shandong province with remote sensing services for land surveys, urban construction, agriculture, forestry, energy and disaster prevention and reduction. Other satellites on board will be the rocket will be used to test technologies in satellite platform design, real-time imaging and observation, data acquisition and transmission, or to offer observations of small celestial bodies and remote sensing services. And Russia has imposed a $12.1 million fine on Apple for abusing its dominant position in the market by giving preference to its own applications, a government regulator said this Tuesday. The move comes as Russian authorities aiming to bring the domestic segment of the Internet under state control. It also comes as antitrust agencies in the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom and South Korea take an increasing interest in Apple as firms seek to break free of the terms of its global app store. Russia's Federal Anti-Monopoly Service said in a statement that Apple was found to have abused its dominant position in the iOS distribution market through a series of actions which resulted in a competitive advantage for its own products. On Tuesday, the Spanish government confirmed that 2 Spanish journalists and an Irish national were killed in Burkina Faso after they were ambushed by insurgents while on an anti-poaching mission. In a press conference, the Spanish Foreign Minister confirmed the deaths of the 2 journalists, whom she identified as David Beriain and Roberto Fraile. Both were from northern Spain and were working on a documentary about anti-poaching efforts in the African nation. The 2 were part of a group of 40 who were ambushed on Monday in a nature reserve in the southern part of the country. In recent years, Burkina Faso has faced increasing violence from armed groups, several of them linked to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. On Tuesday, Egypt's Tourism and Antiquities Ministry announced that archaeologists had unearthed 110 ancient tombs in the Nile Delta. The tombs, some of which have human remains inside, were found at an archaeological site in Dakalia, the province northeast of the capital Cairo. They include 68 oval-shaped tombs dating back to the pre-dynastic period. Also found were 37 rectangular-shaped tombs from an ancient era known as the Second Intermediate Period of Egypt. Archaeologists also found human remains of adults and children, and funerary equipment and pottery objects in the tombs. This marks the latest in a series of archaeological discoveries in recent years and represents a chance to revive the country's tourism sector badly impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. And we have come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.